A reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 11 through 18. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father.
I am the good shepherd. Of the 7 I am sayings of Jesus, this one, I am the good shepherd, is probably the easiest of all the sayings to imagine and relate to. More than the vine, the bread of life, or gate for the sheep, Jesus, the good shepherd, is tangible and can be portrayed in stained glass windows and, in fact, seen all over the world as a recognizable image. It's an image that kids know and often can be found on the front of children's Bibles. Jesus, the good shepherd, is comforting, an image echoed in the 23rd Psalm, considered one of the most beloved passages and frequently quoted passages in all of Scripture. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. From the 23rd Psalm. We draw strength from this good shepherd, often in the most challenging and darkest times of our lives, when we long for comfort and a God who is near, tending and caring for us when we are most vulnerable and afraid. But I wonder, how helpful or relatable is this image of a good shepherd in our current reality? I mean, shepherd sightings are kind of infrequent these days for most people, other than the once-a-year Christmas program. In biblical times, everyone likely knew a shepherd or had at least seen one, so Jesus naming himself the Good Shepherd made a lot of sense. But what might we make of this metaphor today in our modern world? I'm guessing if we were really honest with ourselves and one another, we would not mind having a good shepherd around, leading and guiding us today. I'm sure it would make things much more simpler. After all, we are not too different from sheep. It's not a stretch to see how the world then and now looks for someone to lead, hence our obsessive love of superheroes. We look for heroes. We want someone to show us the way, someone who will walk before us, reassuring us that everything will be okay, that we have nothing to fear on the road ahead. But think about a hard decision that you have made in your life. Do I stay or do I leave? Do I leave this place, this job, maybe even this marriage? Do I have this surgery or another round of chemo? It is normal to want guidance and direction from the one in whom we place our trust, a God that we count on not to lead us astray or into harm's way. But what exactly is a good shepherd? We heard in the introduction to the text that the Greek word translated as good, kailos, means real or proper or true. Now, there are plenty of competing voices these days, all clamoring for our attention, our votes, our time. Voices from our TVs, our tablets, voices on social media, and they go on and on and on. But how do we sort it all out and know what is true. With the help of AI, I learned that Google processes roughly 1.8 billion searches every day, which is equivalent to about 99,000 searches per second. Seems like a good shepherd would also be a little more reliable than Google, more trustworthy than horoscopes, and could help us sort through all the possibilities and obstacles to find our way through. I do wonder, though, if Google has become more common than God or our inner wisdom as a go-to for discernment. On the internet, where we can search anything and AI-generated answers appear that have been chosen for us from a scouring of the internet, we find they're there, but perhaps are not necessarily true. These days especially, it's hard to know, to find, to hear that still, quiet voice within us of the Good Shepherd. Out there are also many false shepherds. Jesus says, who have only their own interest in mind, the thieves and the bandits, the ones looking to exploit the flock. The true shepherd, however, on the other hand, will always genuinely care for the sheep, day by day, leading them out of danger, leading them back to the sheepfold of community where there is safety and a feeling of not being alone. Indeed, here is a good shepherd who works not for the sake of harvesting wool or mutton, but rather for the sake of the sheep themselves flourishing, thriving, and living. I came, Jesus said, crystallizing his mission that they may have life and have it abundantly. In other words, the Good Shepherd loves the sheep with a tangible, down-to-earth, everyday kind of love. And the sheep, in turn, sense this, trust this, and follow. It turns out that back in the time of Jesus, there were very few grown men or women who were shepherds or even wanted to be a shepherd. Christian theologian and historian Diana Butler Bass notes that in the ancient Middle East, herding was not something that any respectable man would do, but rather shepherding was a task most often given to women. Remember Rachel, the beloved wife of Jacob that we hear about in Genesis, or Zipporah, who became Moses' wife, referenced in the book of Exodus. These women were shepherds. But in addition to women, shepherding was also a job for children, the enslaved, the poor, the elderly, all people who were socially marginalized. So to hear Jesus' claim to be a good shepherd was sort of strange, because being a shepherd in his time was not aspirational and certainly held no status or authority. But then again, it was consistent with who Jesus really was, not the one who religious authorities and government leaders expected him to be. This was the same guy who said the first shall be last and chose a donkey rather than a chariot to ride into Jerusalem. When considering the time and context, Butler Bass writes that what we hold as comforting today, the image of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, would have actually been more familiar, but a confusing reference to anyone seeking safety or comfort during the ancient times, because of the job of a shepherd often fell to society's least important members, the expendable people doing the most menial tasks, who were often dismissed, devalued, and overlooked. Not that different from many of our jobs today. Can you imagine Jesus also saying and identifying with those on the margins today? It might sound like this: I am the good migrant farm laborer. I am the good dishwasher. I am the good night security guard. I am the good housekeeper. I am the good CNA. I am the good sanitation worker. Shepherding was not glamorous work and often a job held by those considered unfit for any other occupation. And yet, in choosing this I am statement, Jesus identified himself with the least of these, elevating the occupation of shepherding to sacred status, claiming it to be the very work of God. By doing so, Jesus extended dignity and worth to all who shared in the holy work of tending, guiding, guarding, providing, protecting, and caring. I am the good shepherd, said Jesus, foregoing respectability, but modeling a new way of leading and being in solidarity and community with the most vulnerable and marginalized people. Brazilian author Paul Coelho wrote, "The world is changed by your example, not by your opinion." Jesus lived this. He knew it, and he chose the I am statements to make clear his purpose and values and commitments. I am the good shepherd was an intentional and powerful example to the religious authorities and community, and even to us today. Now, personally, I have limited experience with sheep or shepherding in the traditional sense, but I have observed and admired shepherds on pilgrimages to Palestine and Ireland. Sheep in the lands of Ireland and Palestine have a lot of freedom, spanning villages, roads, and hills. In Palestine, sheep often have more access to move through spaces than many of the Palestinian people themselves. And in Ireland, hitting a sheep with your car can actually lead to a charge of dangerous driving and the loss of driving privileges. Sheep, we see, are valuable, and shepherding requires a great skill and awareness. It's not a mindless job. Watching shepherds and sheep move together, it doesn't take very long to notice that shepherds don't actually drive the sheep like you drive cattle. Shepherds accompany sheep, walking alongside of them, moving among them, leading them to safety and food, climbing hills with them, protecting them from dangerous cliffs and predators. Watch them long enough, and sheep blend in with human life, and shepherds blend in with sheep, often eating and sleeping close to one another, so much so that a bond forms between them. And shepherds call their sheep by name, and sheep know the familiar and certain voice of their shepherd. It is an incredible thing to witness. With those images in mind, rather than the Jesus holding a baby lamb picture hanging in the nursery of my childhood church, Jesus as the Good Shepherd doesn't seem so ancient or irrelevant, but rather a metaphor that stands the test of time as one who cares for the most vulnerable and walks in solidarity and calls each one of us by name, concerned about our needs. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is clear on who he is, but I wonder, are we clear on who we are in relation to this Good Shepherd? What does it mean to be a sheep, a follower of Jesus? Now, let's be real. A sheep isn't something that most of us would claim as our own I am statement when given a choice. I polled my family, and none of us had sheep as one of our top 10. And while I am good with the Good Shepherd and following Jesus, I really don't want to have to give up Google Maps or Waze and see them become a relic of the past. Despite the cuteness of the Wallace and Gromit sheep or the sheep seen on the Serta mattress commercials, real sheep are smelly and messy, puffy balls of matted wool who seem to wander aimlessly without thought or purpose. This image of being a sheep isn't so inspiring. And it's easier to see and claim Jesus as the Good Shepherd than claim myself as a sheep. But there's also more. Sheeple, sheep plus people, is now officially a word, according to Merriam-Webster. To call one a sheep in our country today and in our culture is often seen as an insult, implying people who are docile, compliant, or easily influenced, blindly following. So a sheep doesn't exactly have any good connotation. As it turns out, the word sheeple is not new. While you may have assumed, as I did, that this was a word originated when someone mashed the word sheep and people together, it turns out that the first known use of sheeple came in 1945 when a columnist used it to describe people mindlessly obeying their government. Scripture offers examples from the animal kingdom that we sometimes resist and other times seek to emulate, all of which cause me to wonder if we can be connected to the Good Shepherd and not blindly follow. Many of you know that I recently turned 50. I eagerly awaited this birthday threshold, ready to celebrate my age, being more congruent with my old soul. In wanting to be intentional about aging and determined to do my 50s well, without the physical presence of my mother or grandmothers to guide me, I reached out to a few older, wise women in my life with a question. What was important to you at this stage of your life, looking back? To my surprise, among these diverse women, there was a theme that emerged in their responses. It was the importance of trusting oneself, listening to what I know to be true, they said over and over again. Glennon Doyle wrote in her book, Untamed, "When I pose a question about my life in words or abstract images, I sense a nudge, and that nudge guides me." Doyle refers to this nudge as her knowing. She shared, "What I learned is that God lives in this deepness inside of me. And when I recognize God's presence and guidance, God celebrates." Later, she goes on to say, "I now take orders only from my own knowing, and whether I'm presented with a work, a personal, or a family decision, whenever uncertainty arises, I sink beneath the swirling surf of words and fear and expectations, conditioning and advice, and search for the feel, for the knowing." Doyle concluded with, "The more I live by my own knowing, the less afraid I become. I trust that with the knowing will follow me and go with me wherever I go, nudging me toward the next thing, guiding me all of the way home." I love Doyle's reference to the knowing and how she has made space for it in her life, space to be quiet and recognize it. The knowing, the Good Shepherd, or whatever you call the Holy One who knows you, loves you, and calls you by name, is essential to being a sheep and making it through these days, grounding and guiding us in remembering who we are. But what about if you don't sense a knowing or hear Jesus' voice? Does this mean that you are somehow left out or excluded from the love and care of God? No way. God invites time and time again, in each moment, each breath, each time we take communion, God invites us into relationship. God's love is wide and welcoming, not exclusive. Now, there is an intangible intuition between the Good Shepherd and sheep. It turns out that sheep are exceptionally good at hearing, and especially at hearing the voice of their shepherd. As Rev Barb described last week in her sermon on another I am statement, that I am the gate for the sheep, there was a practice among shepherds of combining and corralling their sheep back in Jesus' time. You can just imagine how noisy and chaotic of a scene that would be. But at the end of the day, when all the shepherds would call for their sheep, the sheep would follow in the midst of all that chaos, among all those competing voices. And the sheep would be able to distinguish their specific shepherd's voice. In this way, Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, casts faith as a form of experiential love and trust. Sheep sense the shepherd's care, making it possible to trust and follow, and not just aimlessly or blindly. And over time, the sheep become one with the shepherd, listening and acting in communion, just as we become one with those we love and trust. It's not that we are called to follow this good shepherd without our minds, but instead we are invited to sense when we are aligned with the one who has our best interest at heart. So, my friends, hear the good news of the gospel. God is with us in this deep down to our toes, existential, loving, indwelling sense, saying, "Abide in me and I will abide in you. I will never leave or forsake you. I know you, I love you, and I call you by name." The choice is ours. We're not sheep stuck in a pen, controlled by a manipulative shepherd, but rather a good shepherd who only wants good for us and for the whole of creation. So be a good sheep with a discerning ear, listening for the voice of the good shepherd, the shepherd who will not lead you astray, but towards the goodness and wholeness of life. Maybe being a sheep isn't so bad after all.